serve an amazing God who is worthy to be trusted. We serve an amazing God who is sweeter than them all.
Amen.
I'm so thankful for His precious Holy Spirit that has been here and already ministered to us. Many years ago, when our girls were in elementary school, we had an issue with some boys. Our daughter Rebecca was being teased by some boys and harassed. And at first, I did what any good father would say, just ignore them, they'll go away, be bigger than they are. But that didn't fix it up. We told the teachers, we said, hey, teachers, can you keep a lookout for what's going on? And they tried to for a little bit, but Rebecca came home and said, no, it's still going on. So I said, all right. At this point, we lived from here to Harvey's house, or even closer to the school. The girls would walk through the backyard of the school into to our house. And so I thought, okay, I was working full-time at a church, so I could arrange my schedule to get out when school was getting out. So I got out early and went down and got to the door where Rebecca and her classmates would exit. And I did that one day, and then it was the second day, and finally the third day, these boys came out and they harassed Rebecca. They were touching her and they had their arms around her. I'm like, all right. They had met Papa Bear. I'm like, hi guys, we're going to go see your principal. So we walked. For them, it probably felt like a 100-mile death march. But I walked them into the principal's office. I said, these boys have been told by their teachers, and I'm sure by you, that they should stop harassing and teasing Rebecca. And I caught them with their arms around Rebecca. The principal was none too happy. And because somehow we had gotten a good rapport with the principal there, and she just did not want to see one of the good parents coming in saying there was a problem. And sure enough, we did. And guess what? We never had another single problem with those boys. They kept their words to themselves and kept their hands off of Rebecca. But one of the things that Rebecca learned that day is that she could trust her dad. That her dad had her back. Trust. It is a word that we often use in Christian circles, do we not? You heard what we sang, I just keep trusting my Lord. We sang Blessed Assurance. We sang Only Trust Him. And even the songs that I picked us to sing are songs about trust. And so, but what does trust mean? What does it mean to trust something? Now, I'm gonna give you a little challenge. I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak back to me here. Can you define the word trust? But here's the one little hurdle you're going to have to go over. Define trust without using the word faith or belief. Can you define the word trust without using the word faith or belief? Someone take a shot at it? It's possible.
I just think it's if I was imagining I was falling backwards, like you did when you were kids and someone would catch you, that's to me. I know He will catch me.
Okay? All right.
Yes, I would say love. Because if you love somebody, like we do God, you trust Him.
Okay? Good.
Complete reliance.
Complete reliance. Well, that would fit Marjorie's word picture, that if you're going to fall backward into somebody's arms, you're in complete reliance. Yeah, I think those are some really good answers. And I thought about this. This was my answer. Being confident that a person or thing has my back. I know that if I wade into something, they're going to help me out. The dictionary definition is this: reliance on the integrity, strength, ability, surety of a person or thing. Confidence. So here's the question we want to explore today. It's a question that people outside the church are asking, and they're saying, can I trust God? Is God reliable? During the second half of last week's message, we looked at this question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And people say, well, because bad things happen to good people, God cannot be trusted. And as we explored that question, we looked at the story of Adam and Eve and the temptation of the serpent. And remember that Adam and Eve did not resist the forbidden fruit because in their mind's eye, they said that God did not have their best interest at heart. They felt that God was holding back on them. They felt that God was a cosmic killjoy. You know, just like they thought God was like we are as parents. You know, our kids think, well, why doesn't mom and dad let me do what I want? They're just trying to take away all my fun. And we as human beings do the same thing. Like, why is God just trying to take away all my fun? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Last week I gave you that massive chart that outlined the Bible. And remember that the Bible starts out with God and righteous people in paradise, Satan and sin enter. That's in Genesis 1 and 2. And then Satan and sin enter in Genesis 3 through 5. Then the world is judged and destroyed. We'll talk briefly about these next two this morning. The world is judged and destroyed in one world government. The old covenant, Jesus Christ at the top of the pinnacle. The new covenant, the world, one world government. The world judged and destroyed. Satan and sin exit. And God redeemed people in paradise. We're going to talk about a couple of these points this morning. Adam and Eve were banished from the garden, correct? And what happened after Adam and Eve were banished from the garden? They decided that they were going to have a baby. And so they had one baby and then they had another. And they had two boys and their names were? Cain and Abel. And one was a farmer and the other was a herdsman. And a time came, and we don't know why they would have offered sacrifices to God, but they did. And so they come, and it comes time that they're supposed to offer their sacrifice to God. Cain brings fruit and vegetables, and Abel brings meat. And for some reason, we don't know, we're not told in the Word why, but Cain's offering is rejected, and Abel's offering comes to light. And this makes Cain really upset. And he goes and he kills his brother. The sin of the parents is now upon the children, and so it goes. By the time we get to Genesis chapter 5, we are given this big genealogy of the descendants of Adam, and we don't know exactly how many years transpired between Cain and Abel and Noah, but apparently in this short, relatively short amount of time, it had gotten so bad. You should all respond, how bad was it? It got so bad that God said, you know what? I'm going to wipe them all out and start over again. But there was one man. The Bible says that Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He says, you know what? I'm going to save Noah. I'm going to tell Noah to build a big boat, which Noah did, and put all these animals in it. And for a year, can you imagine building a boat in the middle of the desert? And all your neighbors laughing at you? What are you doing, Noah? What do you mean you're building a boat? And so, yeah, what is a boat? Exactly. And so Noah builds this thing, this ark, and they float for nearly a year. They're on the ark. Do you think it took some trust on Noah's part? Finally. But then, it's really interesting. Noah arrives, he offers a sacrifice to God, and then we have another genealogy, and we find that the population is exploding of the ancient world. And the Bible describes the people as having all one language. And they decided they were going to build a tower. How do you think that went? All the way, they were going to build a tower all the way to heaven. And rather than and here's the problem, rather than wanting to make the Lord famous, they wanted to make a name for themselves. And that was a problem. So, it was the famous one world government. They thought that if we only love each other and we work together as one, you could really go to John Lennon's song, Imagine, that we could all live together and work as one. It would be perfect. It would be this utopia. It would be heaven on earth. well, it didn't sit well with God because they weren't making God number one, they were making themselves number one. So he went and confused the languages, and they couldn't understand each other. In the process, they were scattered throughout the world. And these are two great examples of man's unreliance on trusting in God. They failed to rely on God and instead relied on good old human ingenuity, which isn't very good at all. As we mentioned several weeks ago, Solomon said there is nothing new under the sun. We do the same thing. 4, 5, 6,000 years later, we're doing the same thing. So what was God going to do now? Now the people were scattered all over the earth. He'd already created Adam and Eve. That didn't go well. There was the generation of Noah. That didn't go so well. And then there was the generation of the Tower of Babel, and that didn't go well either. That brings us to a man named Abram. In chapter 15 of Genesis, God makes a promise to a man named Abram, a covenant. The Lord tells Abram, who is old already, he's 75 years old. He says, I'm going to make you and your wife have descendants that you can't even count, as many as the stars. How would you like to be 65, men? Men, how would you like to be 65 and be 75 and be told that you were going to have the descendants as many as the stars? Now, ladies, you're 65 years old and you're told that you are going to have descendants as many as the stars. Would you not say that, God, you're nuts? I think this is made, I'm going to share a little example of how I think Abraham felt.
This is why you brought me here, Lord? Out from the glare of the city lights to a wilderness of stars more vast than ever imagined. I gotta tell you, I've been waiting on the promise, but I haven't seen you moving yet. More descendants than the stars? Right. In case you haven't noticed, I don't even have one child. I'm not exactly a young pup anymore. And Sarah? Well, Sarah sort of missed out on the childbearing years long ago. Well, you know we always wanted a family. Tried for years to start one. 4 specialists, several treatments, and a whole lot of credit card debt later, we still don't have any kids. You know what that does to a woman? The trying, the praying, the anguish of someone with a mother's heart and empty arms. It turns her hard and bitter, Lord. For years I watched her struggle. And my sweet Sarah, I felt like I was losing her. But she came back to me. And we made it through stronger than ever. But now this promise of yours? This hope of children more numerous than the sand and stars? Well, we're waiting. And we're expecting you to honor your word. It almost seems like a tease. We laid that dream to rest years ago, Lord. Years ago. Don't resurrect it just to make us wait.
You know, for those who were in that culture, to be barren was to mean that God had turned his face away from you. And so barrenness was a huge problem. And then God says this. Abram says, how can I be sure of this? And God says, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And so Abram presented all of these to him and killed them. And then he cut each animal down the middle and laid the halves by side. He did not, however, cut the birds in half. Some of the vultures swooped down to eat the carcasses, but Abram chased them away. In verse 17, after the sun went down and darkness fell, Abram saw the smoking fire pot fire pot and flaming torch passed between the halves of the carcasses. So the Lord made a covenant with Abram that day and said, I have given this land to your descendants. This was an ancient ritual called the covenant. In this ritual, two parties would walk between the carcasses of these dead animals. It was a handshake. It was signing on the dotted line of the contract. And it said, may my blood be shed like that of these animals if I violate this contract. And you know what's really interesting about this? Is that Abraham did not walk through the animals. Abram only saw God walk through the animals. It was a one-sided contract. It was an unconditional contract. Like I said, Abram finds out about this when he's 75 and Sarah when she's 65, into a culture that values children. If you don't have any children, you are not blessed of God. You have not followed God's plan. Not much different than today's health and wealth gospel. If you're sick, you must have a lack of faith. If you're not wealthy, you must have a lack of faith. Same thing in the Old Testament. If you don't have children, you must have a lack of faith. You must have done something wrong. Abram and Sarai were wondering where God was in the process, and finally Sarai says, you know what? I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to give my husband, my servant, and he can have a son through her. Well, we all know how that worked out, right? Yeah, Ishmael was born, Sarah wasn't happy, and there's been discord in the Middle East ever since. Ishmael is often considered the father of the Muslim and Islam race. And Isaac would be the son of the Christian and Jewish faith. God reminds Abram and Sarai of the covenant. He changes their name to Abraham and Sarah and says that Abram will indeed have many descendants. As Billy Joel said many years ago, it's a matter of trust. That Adam and Eve, remember Adam and Eve? They didn't think God was reliable. They said, you know what? God doesn't have our best interests at heart, so let's go and take the forbidden fruit. God did not have their best interests at heart. And so the same could be said of Abraham and Sarah. They needed to learn that God indeed was reliable. Life was intense for Abraham and Sarah. But in the midst of the uncertainty of what they could and could not control, they were determined to trust God. Grown-up faith knows that God is able and reliable no matter what we are going through. God has been God from the beginning, and He will be God in the future. God, I want you to catch this. I'm going to say it twice. God is not obligated to meet all of our expectations, only His promises. Catch that? God is not obligated to meet our expectations, only His promises. 25 years. 25 years. How long have we been married? 32. I was going to trust your brain for that more than mine this morning. So we've been married 32 years. So that means for 25 of those years, we would have been childless. Can you imagine 25 years of waiting on God's promise for a child? No wonder they wanted to take things into their own hands. 25 years later, Abraham is 100 years old, and Sarah is 90, and guess what? They have a baby. Hallelujah! God fulfilled His promise. I'm sure Abraham and Sarah said, God, could you wait it any longer? But aren't there times like that in our own life? We say, God, could you wait any longer? Did you have to wait till the 11th hour? Did you have to wait till 11:59 to pull this one out? 12 years later, God says to Abraham, I want you to go sacrifice your son Isaac, your only son. And he follows and he trusts God and he provides a lamb. And those people become the nation of Israel. The rest of the Old Testament is their story and looks forward to the coming of the Messiah who is promised to Abraham. His name is Jesus. He is a descendant of Abraham, and he is the fulfillment of the promise, and the world is indeed blessed because Jesus has arrived here on earth. And when God made the covenant with Abraham, he promised Abraham a bigger and better life. But the ceremony of the fire pot foreshadows the coming of Jesus. God promised to spill his own blood to make good on the contract. In a very real sense, he did that through Jesus on the cross. Jesus' death on the resurrection is central even in the human history and sits at the very peak of our triangle. This morning you may wonder when the trust test ends. I got bad news if you expect that you can just trust God and then it'll all be done. The trust test never ends. We cannot escape our need to trust God. We can never outgrow our trust in God. God wanted our dependence on him in the garden. He wanted our dependence on him as he prepared for the flood. He wanted our dependence when we were building towers to our own fame. He wanted it even as he offered up a covenant to Abraham. And he still wants it. He still wants us to trust in him. He still wants us to depend on him. Grown-up faith grows in dependence and trust. And guess what? The only time we graduate from trusting in God is when he calls us home to be with him. Then we grow up and we graduate. Let me share with you, and I've shared this story before, but I don't know that I've shared it with everybody in this congregation, about a time that I had to trust in God. We were living in Martinsville, Virginia, and about October, Pam got sick. And they gave her the antibiotics, and the antibiotics created more problems, and she got sicker. And by Thanksgiving, she was just not herself, and just everything was all kinds of weird. And I'm like, what is going on? And we'd go to the emergency room, and they say, oh, we'll just give you some potassium, and you'll be good. That happened like 5 times. Finally, Christmas came. Pam was sicker than you could believe. New Year's came along, and by this time the emergency room doctor said, well, you need to go see an OBGYN because there's something wrong with your uterus. The OBGYN said, no, he was just trying to get rid of you. There's nothing wrong with your uterus, but there's definitely something wrong. I'm going to schedule you to see a gastroenterologist. Well, that appointment was like 3 weeks into January. Right after New Year's, Pam said, I can't do it anymore. Dale, I'm sick. And so we called up the OBGYN, and they called over to the gastroenterologist, and they said, can you get this patient in immediately? And so we went, I'll never forget, it was Friday afternoon, and we went to the gastroenterologist, and she laid on the table, just laid on the table. She was sick. Little did I know that she was just days from death at that time. They get her in the hospital, and the doctor says, Friday night, he says, just keep her comfortable, and if she's alive in the morning, we'll do a colonoscopy. And they tried to force down all that stuff to make you go in a colonoscopy, and it was just coming up the other way, and it wasn't making her go, it was just making her even sick. So they did the colonoscopy Saturday morning and talked to the doctor. He goes, well, she has C. diff. I didn't know what C. diff was. Learned later that it's this really contagious thing. And for 3 months, Pam had been cooking our dinners and washing our dishes, and not one of us got sick. Wow. So anyway, Sunday morning came, they said, we're going to start on our new medicine. And Sunday morning came around, and I had to preach. And after church, one of the dear ladies there at church says, Pastor Dale, I'm going to take your kids, and we're going to go to Pizza Hut. And then I went, and she goes, I'm going to have you, we'll find somebody to preach tonight. You don't have to worry about having a service tonight. We'll take care of it. And so I went to see Pam. And by the time I got there, I'm like, wow, that was a quick recovery. I mean, she was, I think at that point they gave her country fried steak, collard greens, and pinto beans. Now, if you're recovering from C. diff, collard greens and pinto beans are definitely not the kinds of things you would need to eat. And the doctor goes, I don't know why my patients always get this stuff when they're recovering from this. But she was looking better. So I went home that night. And oh, by the way, on Friday, I got home and I called my mom and dad, and I called churches that we've been to. I sent emails out to district superintendents and people that I knew. Everybody I know, I said, please pray for Pam. She's in a desperate situation. And they did. I'm like, God, I cannot lose her. I cannot lose her. I've got 3 kids. I cannot lose her. I pastor a church, and I don't make enough at church that I don't have to work a second job. I need her to help take care of the kids. Sunday afternoon, she was looking better, and Monday morning, I had to go to Radio Shack. I was working there, and she called me about noon. She goes, Dale, the doctor says I'm coming home. Come on, somebody.
Woo! Come on.
So I get there, and Pam tells me this. She goes, the doctor came in this morning and said that I'm ready to go home. He says, tell your husband that he should have been planning your funeral, not planning to take you home.
Wow. Yeah.
Pam said the song that came to her mind on Sunday afternoon was this. Were the ocean filled with ink, and I'm messing up the lyrics now at the moment, but the chorus goes, the love of God, how rich, how pure, how measureless, how strong, it shall forevermore endure, the saints and angels song. She says, the love of God, that song has been going through my head all day. And she goes, I have an assurance, I have a confidence that God is going to bring me through this. This was on Sunday. So Monday night, 5 o'clock, I picked up Pam and we went home.
The other thing about his bed.
Oh, he goes, Pam said, oh, Pam, we have people praying for us. He goes, oh no, don't start that. He goes, don't tell me about your miracles
And your God.
and your God. I feel sorry for doctors who think they're all that. I believe in doctors. I believe in doctors. I think doctors have been sent here to help us. But Pam's healing was supernatural miracle. Barry, your healing is a supernatural miracle.
Amen.
We have a God who can supernaturally heal us and save us. And He is worthy to be trusted. In times of testing and trial, we can sing, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest friend, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. So many people say, well, God, how can God leave me? Well, it's more like He's carrying us. If you remember the old poem, we need to place our full reliance on our full trust in God. I would rather put my trust in the Creator of the universe who loves me and always keeps His promises. He can always be trusted. And I hope that you this morning put your trust in Him as well.